The Donna Adelson case. When love becomes murder. In the affluent suburbs of South Florida, the Adelson family lived what appeared to be the American dream. Donna Adelson, a 75-year-old matriarch, had built a comfortable life surrounded by her successful children. Her son Charlie was a respected dentist, and her daughter Wendy seemed to have it all: a law degree, a marriage to a brilliant professor, and 2 beautiful children. But beneath this veneer of success, a darkness was growing that would ultimately tear apart not just one family, but 2. The story begins in Tallahassee, Florida, where Dan Markel, a promising law professor at Florida State University, was building his career and raising his 2 young children with his wife, Wendy Adelson. Markel was known for his sharp intellect, his dedication to his students, and his love for his sons. He had immigrated from Canada, earned his law degree from Harvard, and was making a name for himself in academic legal circles. But the marriage between Dan and Wendy was crumbling. What started as a love story between 2 accomplished professionals devolved into bitter disputes over custody, geography, and control. Wendy wanted to move back to South Florida to be closer to her tight-knit family. Dan wanted to stay in Tallahassee, where his career was flourishing. This geographical divide became the fault line that would ultimately lead to murder. Donna Adelson wasn't just any grandmother. She was the controlling force behind her family, a woman who had grown accustomed to getting what she wanted and who viewed her daughter's unhappiness as a problem to be solved at any cost. When traditional divorce proceedings failed to allow Wendy to relocate with the children, Donna began to see Dan Markel not as her son-in-law, but as an obstacle to her family's happiness. The prosecution would later argue that Donna orchestrated what can only be described as a family conspiracy. She allegedly began discussions with her son Charlie about eliminating the problem permanently. These weren't casual complaints about an ex-son-in-law, but calculated conversations about murder for hire. The family's wealth and connections would prove crucial in turning these dark fantasies into deadly reality. What makes this case particularly chilling is how a grandmother, someone typically associated with nurturing and protection, allegedly became the architect of violence. Donna Adelson represented herself as motivated by love for her daughter, but prosecutors painted a picture of a woman whose love had curdled into something toxic and dangerous. The murder plot that emerged wasn't a crime of passion, but a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that spanned months and involved multiple participants. At the center was Charlie Adelson, the dentist's son who allegedly served as the conduit between his mother's desires and the criminal underworld needed to carry out the killing. Charlie had been romantically involved with Catherine Magbanua, a woman who had connections to individuals willing to commit violence for money. Through this relationship, the family allegedly gained access to 2 hitmen, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. What's particularly disturbing about this arrangement is how it demonstrates the intersection between privilege and criminal activity. A wealthy family using their resources to purchase death. The conspiracy reveals how each participant played a specific role. Donna allegedly provided the motivation and possibly the funding. Charlie served as the intermediary and financier. Catherine Magbanua connected the family to the shooters, and Garcia and Rivera carried out the actual murder. This division of labor was designed to create distance between the family and the crime, but it also created multiple points of evidence for investigators to eventually uncover. On July 18, 2014, Dan Markel returned to his Tallahassee home after a routine trip to the gym. He pulled into his garage, a space that should have represented safety and normalcy. Instead, it became the scene of his execution. The hitmen had tracked his movements, waited for the perfect moment, and struck with cold precision. Markel was shot twice in the head while sitting in his car. The attack was swift and brutal, designed to ensure there would be no survivors to identify the killers. Neighbors heard the gunshots and called police, but by the time first responders arrived, the damage was done. Dan Markel, the devoted father and respected professor, was dead at age 41. The murder scene told a story of premeditation and professional execution. This wasn't a random crime or a burglary gone wrong. The killers had specifically targeted Markel, knew his routines, and struck when he was most vulnerable. The precision of the attack suggested experienced criminals working under contract. What makes this murder particularly tragic is understanding what Dan Markel lost and what his children lost. He was in the prime of his career, with academic papers to write, students to mentor, and most importantly, 2 young sons to raise. The ripple effects of his death extended far beyond his immediate family to his students, colleagues, and the broader legal academic community. The investigation into Dan Markel's murder would become one of the most complex and lengthy in Florida's history. Initially, investigators had little to go on beyond the basic facts of the shooting. There were no obvious suspects, no clear motive that didn't involve the custody dispute, and no immediate evidence pointing to hired killers. However, investigators began to notice patterns that suggested this wasn't a random crime. They discovered that Garcia and Rivera had traveled from South Florida to Tallahassee around the time of the murder. Phone records showed unusual communication patterns between the various conspirators. Financial records revealed suspicious payments and money transfers. The breakthrough came through painstaking detective work and the eventual cooperation of Luis Rivera, one of the shooters, who agreed to testify against his co-conspirators. Rivera's testimony provided the roadmap that connected the Adelson family to the murder, revealing how money flowed from the family through Charlie Adelson to Catherine Magbanua and ultimately to the hitmen. What's remarkable about this investigation is how it demonstrated the power of persistence and methodical police work. The case went cold for periods, but investigators never gave up. They followed financial trails, analyzed phone records, and gradually built a case that could survive the scrutiny of multiple trials. The legal proceedings in this case stretched over nearly a decade, with multiple trials and convictions that slowly unraveled the conspiracy. The first to be convicted were the actual shooters. Sigfrido Garcia was found guilty of first-degree murder, while Luis Rivera accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. Catherine Magbanua's trial was more complex, as prosecutors had to prove her role as the facilitator without direct evidence of her participation in the planning. She was ultimately convicted in 2022 for her role in the murder conspiracy, demonstrating how the law can reach those who enable violence even if they don't pull the trigger themselves. Charlie Adelson's conviction in November 2023 was a crucial step toward the family matriarch. His trial revealed the extent of the family's involvement and the callous way they discussed Dan Markel's death. Recorded conversations showed Charlie joking about the murder and expressing concern only about getting caught, not about the life that had been taken or the children who had lost their father. Donna Adelson's arrest at Miami International Airport in November 2023 was perhaps the most dramatic moment in this long saga. She was attempting to board a one-way flight to Vietnam when authorities apprehended her, suggesting she knew the walls were closing in and was attempting to flee justice. The image of a 75-year-old grandmother being arrested while trying to escape the country crystallized the shocking nature of this case. Here was someone who should have been focused on enjoying her golden years and spending time with her grandchildren, instead facing life in prison for orchestrating murder. Her trial, which concluded with her conviction on September 4, 2025, revealed the prosecution's theory that she was the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. Phone calls recorded while Charlie was in jail showed Donna discussing the case and allegedly attempting to coordinate stories and alibis. These recordings were crucial evidence that she remained actively involved in the cover-up even after the initial murder. Donna Adelson's conviction on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation represents the culmination of over a decade of investigation and prosecution. The 75-year-old grandmother now faces the possibility of life in prison, a stunning fall from her previous life of comfort and privilege. What makes her conviction particularly significant is what it says about justice and accountability. Despite her age, her family connections, and her attempts to distance herself from the actual crime, the legal system held her responsible for her alleged role in orchestrating murder. The conviction sends a clear message that money and family connections cannot shield someone from the consequences of violent crime. The case also demonstrates how domestic disputes, even those involving custody and divorce, can escalate into deadly violence when combined with resources, entitlement, and a willingness to view other people as obstacles to be eliminated rather than human beings with rights and dignity. The Donna Adelson case offers several important lessons about family dynamics, privilege, and the nature of violence. It shows how toxic family loyalty can cross the line into criminal conspiracy, and how wealth can be used not just to solve problems legally, but to eliminate problems through violence. The case also highlights the particular vulnerability of individuals involved in custody disputes. Dan Markel was killed not because of anything he had done wrong, but because he stood in the way of what the Adelson family wanted. This transforms a civil legal matter into a life-and-death situation, demonstrating how quickly domestic conflicts can escalate beyond all reasonable bounds. For true crime enthusiasts, this case represents a perfect storm of family drama, financial resources, criminal connections, and law enforcement persistence. It shows how even the most carefully planned crimes leave evidence trails, and how justice, while sometimes slow, can eventually prevail. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this entire case is considering the impact on Dan Markel's two young sons. These children lost their father to violence, saw their mother's family systematically prosecuted and convicted, and had their lives forever altered by adult decisions they had no control over. The boys, who are now teenagers, have had to grow up knowing that their father was murdered by people connected to their mother's family. They've had to process not just grief, but the complex reality that people who should have loved and protected them were allegedly responsible for the greatest trauma of their lives. This case serves as a stark reminder that the victims of murder extend far beyond the person who dies. The ripple effects of violence touch children, extended family members, friends, colleagues, and entire communities. Dan Markel's murder didn't just end one life. It fundamentally altered the trajectory of many others. Conclusion: a family destroyed by their own choices. The Donna Adelson case stands as one of the most shocking examples of how family love can become twisted into something deadly. What began as a grandmother's desire to help her daughter became a murder conspiracy that destroyed multiple lives and landed several people in prison for life. The convictions of Donna Adelson, Charlie Adelson, and their co-conspirators represent the end of a legal saga, but they cannot undo the fundamental tragedy at the heart of this case. Dan Markel remains dead, his children remain fatherless, and a family that once enjoyed wealth and privilege now faces decades in prison. This case reminds us that no one is above the law, regardless of their age, wealth, or family connections. It also demonstrates the importance of choosing legal solutions to family conflicts, no matter how bitter or frustrating those conflicts might become. When families choose violence as a solution to their problems, they ultimately destroy not just their intended targets, but themselves as well. For viewers of Mystery Docket, the Donna Adelson case offers all the elements of compelling true crime: family secrets, financial intrigue, professional killers, and ultimately, the persistence of justice. It's a story that began with a custody dispute and ended with multiple life sentences, showing how quickly ordinary family conflicts can spiral into extraordinary violence when the wrong choices are made. Disclaimer: this content is based on court proceedings, legal documents, and publicly available information about the Donna Adelson case. The narrative presents the prosecution's theory of events as established through trial testimony and evidence. All individuals mentioned have either been convicted by a jury or have entered guilty pleas. This content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes as part of true crime discussion. We encourage viewers to research court records and official legal documents for the most complete picture of these proceedings. The views expressed are based on the legal findings and do not represent personal opinions about the individuals involved.